I didn't mean to stay that late at the office. That's the thing I keep thinking about now. Because if I'd just finished my report earlier, if I'd gone home when everyone else did, none of this would have happened with Raphael. Or maybe it still would have. Maybe we'd been heading toward it for weeks without me realizing. It started on a Thursday night, right near the end of quarter reporting season. Everyone in our department was exhausted. Half the office looked dead by lunchtime, surviving on iced coffee and passive-aggressive Slack messages. I was sitting at my desk rubbing my eyes when I noticed the time. 9:47 p.m. The entire floor was basically empty. The overhead lights had dimmed into their nighttime setting, casting everything in this soft, bluish glow that made the office feel weirdly intimate. Quiet. Too quiet. I leaned back in my chair and groaned. "Kill me," I muttered to myself. "You okay over there?" The voice startled me enough that I nearly dropped my phone. I looked up and saw Raphael standing a few cubicles away, holding 2 coffees. Raphael was the new guy. Well, not new anymore. He'd been working with us for maybe 2 months, but he still had that mysterious energy around him. Quiet, polite, kept mostly to himself. Nobody really knew much about him. What everyone did know was that he was insanely attractive. Tall, dark curly hair, broad shoulders hidden under fitted button-downs, calm, deep voice that somehow always sounded half amused. The kind of guy who didn't even try and still made people nervous, especially me. Not that I planned on admitting that. I cleared my throat quickly. "Yeah," I said, "just trying to finish this before I die of old age." Raphael smiled a little and walked over. Even after weeks of seeing him around, his face still messed with my concentration. He had these dark eyes that always looked focused on you in a way that felt too intense. He held out one of the coffees. "Thought you might need this." I blinked at him. "You got me coffee? You looked miserable." I laughed softly and accepted it. "Thanks. No problem." For a second, neither of us spoke. It was weirdly comfortable. I'd noticed before that Raphael didn't force conversation like most people in the office. He wasn't one of those loud, corporate personalities always trying to dominate every meeting. Half the time, he barely spoke unless he actually had something worth saying. Honestly, I liked that about him. Probably too much. He leaned against the edge of my cubicle. "You always stay this late?" "Only when upper management decides they hate us." That earned another small smile. I was starting to think we were the only people left alive in the building. We might be. He looked around dramatically. That would explain the smell in the break room fridge. I laughed harder than I should have. Something about Raphael made me relax fast, which was unusual for me. I was normally careful around attractive guys, especially straight ones. I'd learned that lesson years ago. But Raphael was easy to be around. Dangerously easy. I took a sip of coffee while he glanced at my monitor. "You're still working on the Davidson account?" Unfortunately, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "That thing's a disaster." "You've seen it?" "I helped Marcus with some of the back-end files yesterday." I groaned again. "Then you know my suffering." "I know you're suffering." The way he said it made me smile. God, his voice was unfair. Deep, calm, warm in this quiet kind of way. I turned back toward my screen before he noticed me staring too long. "So why are you still here?" I asked. "Server migration." "That sounds terrible." "It is." He took a sip from his own coffee and loosened his tie slightly. I tried not to notice. Didn't work. The movement exposed a little more of his throat and collarbone, and my brain immediately betrayed me. Fantastic. I forced myself to focus on work again. For the next hour, we worked mostly in silence. Occasionally, one of us would make a comment or complain about something stupid at work, but mostly it was just peaceful and weirdly intimate. The office that night felt different. No phones ringing, no coworkers interrupting, no fluorescent chaos. Just me and Raphael sitting a few feet apart while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. At some point, I realized I liked hearing him move around. The sound of his chair rolling slightly, his quiet sighs, the low hum of his voice whenever he muttered to himself. It made the office feel less lonely. Around 11 p.m., my stomach growled loud enough that Raphael looked over immediately. I covered my face. "Oh my God," he laughed quietly. "When was the last time you ate?" "Lunch?" Kenneth. The fact he said my name like that caught me off guard. Calm, familiar, too familiar. "What?" "You're terrible at taking care of yourself. You sound like my mother." Maybe she has a point. I shook my head while smiling despite myself. "There's vending machine trail mix downstairs." That sounds depressing. It is depressing. He stood up suddenly and grabbed his jacket off the back of his chair. "Come on." I frowned. "Where are we going?" "Food. It's almost midnight. There's a diner 2 blocks away." I hesitated. Spending more time alone with Raphael felt like a bad idea for reasons I absolutely did not want to unpack. But he was already waiting expectantly near the elevators. And honestly, I didn't want to say no. So 10 minutes later, we were walking through cold, rain-covered streets together while the city glowed around us. I shoved my hands deeper into my pockets. "You do this often?" I asked. "What?" "Adopt exhausted coworkers." Raphael smirked slightly. "Only the dramatic ones." "Rude." "You survived." The diner was almost empty when we walked in. Just an older couple in a booth and a tired waitress who looked relieved to have customers. We slid into a booth near the window. And that's when things started feeling different. Not office different. Not coworker different. Just different. Because for the first time since meeting Raphael, it was just us without the distraction of work around us. And suddenly I became hyper aware of everything. The way his sleeves were rolled up. The way his dark hair curled slightly from the rain. The way he looked at me when I talked, fully focused like nobody else existed. It made me nervous in a way I couldn't explain. The waitress came by, and after ordering burgers and fries, Raphael leaned back in the booth. "You always this quiet outside work?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm quiet? You are around me." That caught me off guard immediately. No, I'm not. You kinda are." I looked down at the table. The worst part? He wasn't wrong. And judging by the tiny smile forming on his face, Raphael knew it too. "I think you just intimidate me," I admitted jokingly. But Raphael's expression shifted slightly. "Do I?" There was something softer in his voice now, something careful. I shrugged casually even though my heart had started beating harder. "I mean, you're the mysterious, attractive new guy. Everyone's intimidated by you." For a second, he just stared at me. Then he laughed quietly and shook his head. "Mysterious? You barely talk." "I talk to you." The words hit me harder than they should have, especially because he said them so naturally, like it mattered. I don't know why that sentence stuck with me so much. "I talk to you." It shouldn't have meant anything. But sitting across from Raphael in that nearly empty diner at midnight, with rain sliding down the windows beside us, it felt strangely personal. The waitress dropped off our drinks, breaking the moment. Raphael thanked her softly before looking back at me.
"You know," he said, "you're different outside the office, too."
I frowned slightly. What does that mean? At work, you act... He paused like he was choosing the right word. Guarded. Guarded? Mm-hmm. I laughed nervously. You analyzed all that from spreadsheets and meetings? I pay attention. That answer hit harder than it should have. I looked down at my soda to avoid staring at him too long. The truth was, Raphael made me self-conscious in a way I hated. Not because he was arrogant or intimidating, but because he noticed things. Little things. Like when I skipped lunch, when I was stressed, when I got quiet. Most people at work barely noticed if I existed half the time. Raphael noticed everything. The food arrived a few minutes later, and thankfully that shifted the conversation into easier territory. Mostly work gossip. Marcus accidentally replying all to an email chain. One of the finance managers crying in the stairwell last week. The weird smell coming from the fourth-floor kitchen. By the time we finished eating, I was laughing harder than I had in weeks. And Raphael kept looking at me with this expression I couldn't fully understand. Soft. Focused. Like he liked hearing me laugh. That thought alone nearly short-circuited my brain. Around 1 a.m., we finally left the diner. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the city lights. We walked slowly back toward the office parking garage, and somehow, despite talking for almost 3 hours straight, the silence between us still felt comfortable. That was the dangerous part. Not the flirting, if this even was flirting. Not the tension. It was how natural being around him felt. "How long have you worked there?" Raphael asked as we waited at a crosswalk. "Almost 4 years." "That long?" "Unfortunately." He smiled. "You hated that much?" "No. I just thought I'd have my life figured out by now." Raphael glanced at me. "You're what, 26? 27. And you think you're supposed to have everything figured out already?" "Kind of." "That sounds exhausting." I laughed quietly. "It is." The crosswalk light changed, and we started walking again. "I used to think that too," he admitted. I looked over at him. "He did?" "Mm-hmm." "What changed?" He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets before answering. "My last relationship." The word relationship immediately grabbed my attention. I tried very hard not to react too noticeably. "Oh." "It ended badly." There was something careful in his voice suddenly, closed off. I nodded slowly. "Sorry." "It's fine now." I wanted to ask more, not because I was nosy, because my brain had instantly locked onto one specific detail. Relationship. No gender attached, no she, no girlfriend, nothing. And suddenly I was becoming very aware of the possibility that Raphael might not be straight, which was a problem, a huge problem, because I was already attracted to him enough. If he turned out to actually like men too, I was screwed. Completely. We reached the parking garage entrance, and Raphael stopped walking. "You parked on level 3, right?" I blinked. "How do you know that?" "You complain about level 3 every morning." I stared at him. "You really do pay attention." His eyes held mine for a second too long. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." My chest tightened unexpectedly. The elevator ride up felt weirdly tense after that. Not awkward, just charged. Like both of us were suddenly aware of something neither of us wanted to say out loud. When the doors opened onto level 3, we stepped out into the mostly empty garage. Only a few cars remained. Mine, his, and silence. I stopped beside my car and unlocked it, suddenly weirdly disappointed the night was ending. "Thanks for dinner," I said. "You look like you were 2 emails away from a breakdown." "Fair." He smiled again. God, that smile was becoming a serious issue for me. I opened my car door, but before getting in, I looked back at him. "You know, I didn't think you liked me when you first started working there." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "You were quiet." "I'm quiet with everyone." "Not with me, apparently." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "No, not with you." There it was again, that feeling, like the air around us had shifted into something warmer, more personal. My pulse was suddenly very aware of itself. Raphael stepped a little closer without seeming to realize it. Or maybe he did realize. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. "You want to know something funny?" he asked. "Sure." "The first week I started there, I thought you didn't like me." I laughed immediately. "What? Why?" "You never looked at me." That nearly made me choke, because the reality was the exact opposite. I avoided looking at him because every time I did, my brain short-circuited. "I looked at you," I said weakly. "No," he replied calmly. "You avoided me." The fact he'd noticed that made heat crawl straight up my neck. "I was just busy." "Mm-hmm. You're annoying. And yet you still had dinner with me." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because he was right. And judging by the look in Raphael's eyes right now, he knew exactly what he was doing to me. That realization made my stomach flip hard. The garage suddenly felt too quiet, too private. Raphael looked down briefly before speaking again, softer this time. "I'm glad you stayed late tonight." The sincerity in his voice caught me completely off guard. Not flirtatious, not teasing, real. And for one terrifying second, I wanted to kiss him. The thought hit me so suddenly it genuinely startled me. I looked away immediately. Dangerous. This was dangerous. Coworkers, office drama, potentially straight man, all terrible ideas. But then Raphael said my name quietly. "Kenneth." I looked back at him. He was closer now, not touching me, just close enough that I could smell his cologne and the lingering scent of coffee on his clothes. "You okay?" His voice had gone softer again, concerned. I swallowed hard. "Yeah," but my voice came out rougher than I intended. Raphael noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes flicked briefly toward my mouth before meeting my gaze again. And suddenly, neither of us moved. Not 1 inch. The tension between us became so thick, I could physically feel it. My heart was slamming against my ribs now. Say something. Move. Do literally anything. But before either of us could, a car alarm suddenly blared somewhere across the garage. Both of us jumped apart instantly. The moment shattered. I let out an awkward laugh and rubbed the back of my neck. "Well, that was terrifying." Raphael laughed too, though he still looked slightly dazed. "Yeah." Silence again. Then he stepped back finally. "You should get home." "Right. Home. Normal thoughts. Breathing. I nodded quickly. Yeah, you too. For a second, it looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just smiled softly. Good night, Kenneth. And then he walked toward his car, leaving me standing there like a complete idiot with my pulse still racing. I watched him go longer than I should have, and the worst part, deep down, I already knew this thing between us wasn't over. The next morning, I convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. The tension in the parking garage, the almost moment, the way Raphael looked at me. People misread situations all the time, right? Especially exhausted, touch-starved gay men who accidentally developed crushes on attractive coworkers. So by the time I walked into the office Friday morning, I'd fully committed to acting normal, professional, unaffected. That plan lasted maybe 30 seconds, because the second I stepped onto our floor, I saw Raphael standing near the coffee machine talking to Marcus. Dark gray button down, sleeves rolled up, hair still slightly messy like he'd rushed out the door. And then he looked up and spotted me. The expression on his face changed instantly. Subtle, but obvious enough that my stomach flipped. Morning, he said. Just one word, but somehow it sounded different now, more familiar. Marcus glanced between us. You two seem weirdly happy for people working on a Friday. Raphael answered before I could. We survived quarter reporting. Barely, I muttered. Marcus narrowed his eyes suspiciously. You guys secretly become best friends or something? I laughed nervously. No. Raphael took a sip of coffee without looking away from me. Not secretly. That should not have affected me as much as it did. Marcus groaned dramatically. Oh my God, you did bond. We got dinner after work, Raphael said casually. Marcus stared at us. At midnight? It was a rough night, I explained quickly. Mm-hmm. Marcus pointed between us. This has energy. I nearly choked. What does that mean? You know exactly what it means. Raphael actually looked amused. Meanwhile, I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Marcus eventually wandered off, thankfully, leaving me alone beside the coffee station with Raphael. The second we were alone again, the atmosphere shifted, quieter. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. You're avoiding eye contact again. I stared at him in disbelief. Do you analyze everyone this much? Only people I like. My brain fully stopped functioning for a second. Raphael seemed to realize what he'd said immediately afterward, because his expression changed slightly. Not regret exactly, more like realization. But neither of us corrected it. Neither of us moved. The office noise around us suddenly felt far away. Then someone walked past behind me, breaking the moment. I cleared my throat fast. Well, I should work. You know, employment. Raphael smiled softly. Right, employment. I escaped to my desk before I embarrassed myself further. The problem was, after last night, I couldn't stop noticing him. Every little thing. The way he leaned back in his chair during meetings. The low sound of his laugh whenever I muttered sarcastic comments under my breath. The fact he somehow always looked for me first whenever he walked into a room. And worst of all, I started catching him staring at me. Not casually, not accidentally, actually staring, like he was thinking too much. Around noon, I was trying to focus on emails when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Check your desk drawer. I frowned immediately, then slowly opened the drawer. Inside sat a wrapped blueberry muffin and another iced coffee. I looked up across the office. Raphael was pretending to work at his monitor. pretending very badly. I texted back immediately. "Are you bribing me?" His phone buzzed. A second later, "You skipped breakfast." I stared at the message like an idiot, then looked back over at him. Raphael finally glanced up and smiled. Small, private, like this was something just between us. My heart did something genuinely embarrassing. The rest of the afternoon became torture after that, because now there was undeniably something happening between us, and apparently neither of us planned to stop it. By 5 p.m., most of the office had cleared out for the weekend. I was packing my laptop when Raphael appeared beside my desk. "You heading out?" "Yeah." He nodded toward the elevator. "Come with me?" That should not have sounded as loaded as it did, but somehow it absolutely did. We rode the elevator down alone, again, and somehow elevators with Raphael always felt dangerous now. Too small, too quiet. I could feel him beside me without even looking. Then halfway down, the elevator jolted suddenly before stopping hard. The lights flickered once. I grabbed the railing automatically. What the hell? Raphael frowned and hit the emergency button. Nothing happened. Seriously? I laughed nervously. Please don't tell me we're trapped.
He pressed another button. Still nothing.
Well, he sighed. That's not ideal. I stared at the closed doors. You've got to be kidding me. The elevator sat unmoving between floors, completely silent. No music, no voices. Just me and Raphael standing way too close together in an enclosed space. Fantastic. After a minute, he leaned against the wall calmly. This building is falling apart. You're weirdly relaxed for someone trapped in an elevator. It's probably temporary. Probably? He smiled slightly. You panic easily? I'm dramatic, remember? That's true. I crossed my arms. I liked you better before you started accurately reading my personality. Raphael laughed softly. God, that laugh. Then silence settled again. Not awkward, just heavy. The kind where you become aware of every tiny movement, every breath. The elevator suddenly felt very warm. I loosened my tie slightly. Raphael noticed immediately. Of course he did. You okay? Yeah. You seem nervous. I'm trapped in a metal box. Mm-hmm. His tone said he didn't believe me at all. I looked at him finally. Big mistake. Because Raphael was already looking at me. Really looking at me. His expression softer than I'd ever seen it before. And being trapped in a tiny elevator suddenly didn't feel like the biggest problem anymore. I have a question, he said quietly. My throat felt dry. What? Why do you always act surprised when I'm nice to you? That caught me completely off guard. I don't. You do. I looked away briefly. I guess I'm just not used to it. Raphael's expression shifted instantly. Softer now. More serious. That's kind of sad, Kenneth. I tried joking to deflect. Wow. Therapy session in the elevator. But Raphael didn't laugh this time. Instead, he stepped slightly closer. Not enough to touch me. Enough that my pulse immediately reacted. You deserve people being nice to you, he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice hit me hard. Too hard. Nobody talked to me like that. Not casually. Not gently. And suddenly the tiny space between us felt electric again. I swallowed hard. Raphael. He held my gaze, and for one terrifying second, I thought he was going to kiss me. I really thought he was. His eyes flicked briefly toward my mouth again, and this time I knew I wasn't imagining it. The tension between us became unbearable. Then the elevator suddenly jerked back to life. Both of us stepped apart immediately. The doors opened seconds later onto the lobby like nothing had happened. I let out a shaky laugh. Well, cool. Awesome. Raphael rubbed the back of his neck once. Yeah. Neither of us moved toward the exit right away, because we both knew something almost happened in there. Something dangerous. Something impossible to ignore now. Finally, Raphael looked at me carefully. You busy tonight? My heart skipped instantly. Maybe? He smiled slightly. That sounded convincing. I laughed nervously. What did you have in mind?
There was the smallest pause before he answered. Dinner again. And despite every warning sign in my brain, I already knew I was going to say yes. I should have said no. That's the part that still gets me. Because by that point, it was obvious this thing with Raphael wasn't just innocent coworker bonding anymore. There was tension. Real tension. The kind that made my chest tight every time he looked at me too long. And yet Friday night, after spending an hour pretending to work from home while thinking about him nonstop, I still found myself standing outside a small Italian restaurant downtown, checking my reflection in the window like an idiot. I hated how nervous I was. This wasn't a date. Probably. Maybe. God. I was spiraling so hard I almost didn't notice Raphael walking toward me from across the street. And the second I saw him, every coherent thought vanished. Black jacket, dark jeans, hair slightly damp from the evening mist. He looked unfairly good in casual clothes. Worse, somehow, than office Raphael. Because this version of him felt more real, more relaxed, more dangerous. He smiled the second he reached me. You came. I snorted softly. You invited me. Still counts. His voice had that warm, amused tone again that immediately relaxed me. A little. We headed inside, and the hostess led us to a booth near the back corner of the restaurant. Low lighting, quiet atmosphere. Absolutely date-like enough to make me question my life choices. I picked up the menu mostly so I'd have something to do with my hands. Raphael noticed immediately. Nervous? I looked up sharply. No. You're holding the menu upside down. I looked down. He was right. Wow. Raphael laughed quietly while I fixed it fast. Rough start? You're enjoying this way too much. A little. The waiter came by for drink orders, thankfully interrupting my humiliation. But even after he left, I still felt Raphael looking at me. Not intensely, softly, like he genuinely liked being here with me. That realization alone made my stomach flip. We talked easily through dinner, way easier than we did at work. Without office distractions around us, Raphael opened up more too. I learned he grew up in San Diego, had 2 younger sisters, loved old horror movies, could cook ridiculously well apparently. You cook? I asked skeptically. He looked offended. Why is that surprising? You seem like someone who survives entirely on coffee. That's fair, I smiled. And? And yes, I cook. Like actual meals? Kenneth, he sighed dramatically. I'm not a college freshman. I need proof. You challenging me? Maybe.
His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. I could cook for you sometime. The sentence hit like a truck. My brain stalled completely, because there was no universe where I could cook for you sometime sounded platonic. Not with the way he said it. Not with the way he was looking at me right now.
I cleared my throat quickly. Dangerous thing to offer. Raphael tilted his head slightly. Why? Because if you keep looking at me like that, I'm going to lose my mind. Instead, I shrugged casually. I'm judgmental about food. That's your concern? His smile widened slightly. God, he knew exactly what he was doing now. I could feel it. The flirting wasn't accidental anymore. And somehow that made everything both better and infinitely worse. Halfway through dinner, Raphael excused himself to the bathroom. The second he walked away, the waitress appeared beside the table, refilling waters. Then she smiled at me knowingly. He's really into you. I nearly inhaled ice water. What? She nodded casually toward where Raphael disappeared. That man has not stopped looking at you since you got here. My face went hot immediately. No, we're just... I stared at her helplessly while she grinned. Then she walked off before I could recover. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And the worst part? When Raphael came back to the table and sat down again, I immediately noticed she was right. He did keep looking at me. Constantly. Like he couldn't help it. The realization made it impossible to think straight afterward. By the time we left the restaurant, the city streets were nearly empty. Cool night air drifted between buildings, while traffic lights reflected off wet pavement. We walked slowly, with no real destination. Neither of us seemed eager to end the night. You know, Raphael said after a while, I don't usually do this. I glanced over. What? This. He motioned between us vaguely. Co-worker dinners? His mouth twitched slightly. You know what I mean. My pulse picked up immediately. Oh. Silence stretched briefly. Then he looked ahead at the street instead of me. I'm usually careful about people from work. Same. But with you? He paused. My chest tightened. What? Raphael exhaled softly through his nose before finally looking at me again. You make it hard to be careful. The honesty in his voice completely wrecked me. No teasing, no joking, just real. And suddenly, every tiny maybe between us stopped feeling imaginary. We slowed to a stop outside a closed bookstore. The city around us felt strangely quiet, private. Raphael looked at me carefully, like he was waiting to see if he'd gone too far. And honestly, I was tired of pretending I didn't feel this too. You make it hard too, I admitted quietly. Something shifted in his expression immediately. Relief, maybe, or excitement, probably both. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Raphael stepped closer, slowly this time, giving me every chance to back away. I didn't. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. He was close enough now that I could feel his warmth in the cold air. Close enough that one more step would... A group of loud, drunk people suddenly stumbled around the corner nearby, yelling at each other. Both of us jumped apart instinctively. I laughed nervously. You've got terrible timing. Raphael rubbed his forehead while laughing softly too. At this point, I think the universe is doing it on purpose. Honestly, probably. The group passed us loudly without paying attention, but the interruption broke the moment enough that we started walking again. Still close, though. Still aware. The tension somehow even stronger now, because we both knew what almost happened. Again. Eventually, we reached my apartment building.
and suddenly neither of us seemed sure what to do next. "Well," I said awkwardly. "Well," Raphael echoed. I smiled despite myself. He looked at me quietly for a second before speaking again. "I had a really good time tonight." "Yeah," I admitted softly. "Me too." There was that look again, that dangerous, warm look that made my stomach flip. Then Raphael glanced toward my apartment entrance before back at me. "You gonna invite me up?" The question hit me like a shockwave. Not because of how he said it, because of how badly I wanted to say yes. And judging by the way Raphael was watching me right now, he knew it too. Every survival instinct in my body told me this was a bad idea. Coworkers, complicated feelings, whatever this thing between us actually was. But standing there outside my apartment building with Raphael looking at me like that, I couldn't think clearly anymore. "You gonna invite me up?" His voice stayed calm when he said it, careful, like he was giving me room to say no. And maybe that was the problem. If he'd pushed too hard, acted overly confident, made assumptions, I probably would have shut it down immediately. But Raphael never did that. He always waited for me. I swallowed hard. "You sure that's a good idea?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Probably not." That answer made my pulse jump. Neither of us moved. The cold night air wrapped around us while the city hummed softly in the distance. Then Raphael stepped a little closer again, close enough that my chest tightened instantly. "But I still want to," he admitted quietly. That was it. That completely destroyed whatever resistance I had left. I looked away briefly, trying to collect myself, then sighed. "Okay." Raphael's expression softened immediately. Not smug, not victorious, just happy. And somehow that affected me more than anything else. The elevator ride to my apartment was torture. Again. At this point, elevators had become our thing, apparently. Except this one felt even worse, because now there was no pretending anymore. The tension between us had crossed into something undeniable. I could feel Raphael beside me without even looking at him. Every tiny movement, every breath. When the elevator doors opened onto my floor, I nearly walked into the wall because my brain had stopped functioning properly. Raphael laughed softly behind me. "You okay there?" "Perfect. Thriving, actually." "Mm-hmm." I unlocked my apartment door with embarrassingly shaky hands. The second we stepped inside, reality hit me all at once. Raphael was in my apartment, alone, at night. My pulse immediately doubled. I tossed my keys onto the counter too quickly and nearly dropped them. Smooth. "Nice place," Raphael said softly while looking around. "It's small. It feels like you." That caught me off guard. "What does that mean?" He glanced toward the bookshelf near the couch. "Organized chaos." I snorted. "That's weirdly accurate." "I told you. I pay attention." There it was again, that feeling, like every conversation with him carried something underneath it now. I moved toward the kitchen, mostly because I needed distance before I spontaneously combusted. "You want something to drink?" "Sure." I opened the fridge while trying desperately to act normal, which became difficult when I realized Raphael had followed me into the kitchen, close enough now that I could feel the heat coming off him. I grabbed 2 beers and turned. Bad idea.
because Raphael was suddenly right there, way closer than I expected. My breath caught instantly. His eyes flicked briefly toward my mouth again, and this time, neither of us looked away. The apartment felt impossibly quiet. I handed him the beer, mostly to give my shaking hands something to do. "Thanks," he said softly, but neither of us moved afterward. Still standing too close in my tiny kitchen, still staring. Then Raphael spoke quietly. "Kenneth." Just hearing my name and his voice sent heat straight through me. "Yeah?" He hesitated for the first time all night, like he was debating something internally. Then finally, "I need to know if I'm imagining this." My heart slammed hard against my ribs. "You're not." The answer came out before I could overthink it. Raphael stared at me for one long second, then exhaled softly, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. And before I could process anything else, he kissed me. Slow at first, careful, like he was still giving me time to pull away. But the second his mouth touched mine, every thought in my head disappeared completely. Because holy shit, I had imagined kissing Raphael 100 different ways by this point. None of them came close to the real thing. His hand slid gently to my waist while he kissed me again, deeper this time, and I immediately grabbed the front of his jacket without even realizing it. The sound he made against my mouth nearly ruined me. Everything about him felt warm, solid, real. And the terrifying part? It felt natural, like this had been building forever. Raphael pulled back slightly after a few seconds, breathing hard enough that it made my stomach flip. His forehead rested briefly against mine. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that." I laughed shakily. "Honestly, I think I do." That earned the softest smile from him before he kissed me again, this time less careful. My back hit the kitchen counter lightly, and suddenly Raphael was standing between my legs while my hands slid up into his hair. God, I was completely gone for him already. The realization should have scared me more than it did. His hands stayed respectful though. Even now, even with both of us breathing hard and kissing like we've been waiting forever. That somehow made it even worse, because Raphael wasn't treating this casually, wasn't treating me casually. Eventually, he pulled back again just enough to look at me. His dark eyes were slightly unfocused now. "You okay?" The fact he asked that right now almost melted my heart. I nodded immediately. "Yeah." "You sure?" Instead of answering, I kissed him first this time. That seemed to satisfy him. Raphael smiled against my mouth softly before kissing me back harder. And honestly, at that point I forgot every reason this was supposed to be a bad idea. The office, the complications, the risk. None of it mattered when Raphael touched me like I actually meant something to him. Eventually, we somehow made it to the couch. I honestly don't remember how. One second we were in the kitchen. The next, Raphael was sitting beside me with his arms stretched across the back of the couch while we caught our breath. The tension between us had shifted now, still intense, but softer too, more intimate. I looked over at him, still slightly dazed. "So," Raphael smiled lazily. "So, you realize this makes work unbelievably complicated now." "Mm-hmm." "You seem unconcerned." He looked at me quietly for a second before answering. "That's because I like you more than I care about complicated." My chest physically hurt after hearing that.
Nobody had ever said things like that to me so easily before, like it was obvious, like liking me was simple. Raphael watched my expression carefully. What? I shook my head once. Nothing. Kenneth, that tone again, gentle but impossible to ignore. I sighed quietly. You just make me nervous. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Nervous? In a good way. Raphael's expression softened immediately. Then he reached over and brushed his fingers lightly against my hand. The touch was so small, so casual, but somehow more intimate than kissing him had been. You make me nervous too, he admitted quietly. I stared at him. You hide it better. Not really. Before I could respond, his phone suddenly buzzed loudly on the coffee table. Both of us looked down. Raphael frowned slightly at the screen. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Everything in my stomach tightened instantly. What is it? He looked back at me carefully, and for the first time all night, Raphael hesitated. The shift in Raphael's expression was small. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed it, but I did, because by then I'd become hyper-aware of him. The way his jaw tightened slightly, the hesitation before he picked up his phone. My stomach immediately dropped. What is it? I asked again. Raphael looked down at the screen briefly before locking the phone without answering the message. Nothing important. That was absolutely not true. I could tell instantly. And judging by the way he avoided eye contact for the first time all night, Raphael knew I could tell too. A weird heaviness settled in my chest. Raphael. He exhaled softly through his nose. It's my ex. There it was. Immediate jealousy. Sharp and ugly and embarrassing. I hated how fast it hit me. Oh. Raphael looked back at me carefully. It's complicated. That's usually a terrible sign. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, but the tension stayed in his face. We broke up a few months ago. A few months? Yeah. I tried very hard not to overreact internally, because suddenly this entire situation felt a lot messier than it had 5 minutes ago. Raphael seemed to notice my expression immediately. Kenneth. What? You're spiraling. I'm literally sitting still. You have the exact same face you make during budget meetings. I groaned and leaned back against the couch cushions. Fantastic. Raphael's voice softened. It's over between us. But he hesitated again, and that hesitation told me everything. There's no but, he said carefully. It just ended badly. Something in my chest tightened harder. I looked down at my hands. This was exactly why I avoided situations like this. Feelings got involved too fast. People carried baggage. And somehow, I always ended up carrying more than I should. Raphael shifted closer beside me. Hey. I looked up reluctantly. His expression had gone softer again, concerned. I didn't tell you because I wanted to hide anything. Then why didn't you mention him? You didn't ask. Fair. Annoyingly fair. I rubbed my forehead once. This is exactly why office romances are terrible. Raphael smiled faintly. Romance? My face heated instantly. You know what I mean. No, I liked that word. I rolled my eyes hard enough to make him laugh softly. God, even now he could still disarm me instantly. Raphael's hand brushed lightly against mine again. You want to know the truth? I glanced over at him. What? I almost didn't ask you to dinner. That surprised me enough to cut through my spiraling thoughts. Why? Because I knew I'd like you too much. The honesty in his voice hit me hard again. Raphael always said things so directly when it mattered. No games, no pretending. And somehow, that made him impossible to resist. I looked at him quietly for a second. You already liked me before the diner? He actually looked amused. Kenneth. What? You seriously didn't notice? No. That's insane. I laughed softly despite myself. Well, excuse me for not assuming the hot, mysterious coworker was secretly into me. Raphael shook his head, smiling. I was not subtle. You were terrifying. That made him laugh harder. And suddenly the heaviness between us eased again. Not gone completely, but softer, more manageable. Raphael leaned back into the couch cushions beside me. I've wanted to kiss you since week 2. I stared at him. You're lying. I'm not. Week 2? You wore that dark blue sweater. I blinked at him slowly. You remember my sweaters? I remember everything about you. Okay, that one genuinely knocked the breath out of me a little. Raphael seemed to realize the effect immediately because his expression softened again. What? You can't just say things like that casually. Why not? Because normal people don't survive hearing them. He laughed quietly before nudging my knee lightly with his. The tiny contact felt ridiculously intimate now. Silence settled comfortably between us again after that. But not awkward silence. The kind that happens when you stop trying so hard around someone. I realized then how relaxed Raphael looked with me. No guarded office version, no carefully professional distance, just him. And honestly, that scared me almost as much as it made me happy, because I was already getting attached. Fast, dangerously fast. You're thinking too hard again, Raphael murmured. I looked over. How do you always know? You get this wrinkle between your eyebrows. His thumb lifted instinctively like he wanted to smooth it away. Then he stopped himself halfway. The restraint somehow felt more intimate than if he'd actually touched me. I swallowed hard. What if this gets messy? I admitted quietly. Raphael held my gaze. Then we deal with it. You say that like it's easy. No, he said softly. I say it like you're worth dealing with messy. That completely ruined me. I looked away immediately because my chest suddenly felt too full. Nobody had ever pursued me like this before. Not carefully, not intentionally, and definitely not like I mattered. Raphael noticed my reaction instantly. Kenneth. What? You know I'm serious, right? I nodded slowly. That's the scary part. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Raphael reached up slowly and brushed his fingers gently against my jaw this time. Soft, careful. My pulse jumped instantly. You don't have to be scared of me, he said quietly. The way he said it made my chest ache unexpectedly. Because somehow Raphael had already figured out the truth. That this wasn't just about attraction for me anymore. It was fear, too. Fear of wanting something real. Fear of being disappointed. Fear of finally letting someone get close enough to matter. I leaned into his hand slightly before I could stop myself. Raphael's eyes darkened immediately, and then he kissed me again. Slow, warm, different this time. Less frantic, more intimate. like neither of us was trying to prove anything anymore. One of his hands slid into my hair while the other stayed lightly against my jaw, and the soft sound he made when I kissed him back harder nearly destroyed whatever composure I had left. Eventually, I ended up half in his lap somehow, both of us smiling against each other's mouths between kisses. It felt stupidly natural, dangerously natural. Then Raphael pulled back slightly, breathing unevenly. You have any idea how hard it was pretending not to flirt with you at work? I laughed breathlessly. You were terrible at pretending. Mm-hmm. And Marcus definitely knows something. Marcus thinks everyone's sleeping together. That's true. Raphael smiled softly before brushing his thumb lightly across my cheek. Then his expression shifted again. Subtle, but enough that I noticed immediately. What? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then finally sighed. There's something I should probably tell you before this goes any further. My stomach tightened instantly, because suddenly Raphael looked nervous for the first time since I met him. And that couldn't be good. The second Raphael said that, my stomach dropped. There's something I should probably tell you before this goes any further. Every terrible possibility immediately hit me at once. He was getting back with his ex. He wasn't actually out. He regretted this already. I slowly sat back a little, trying not to panic visibly. Okay, I said carefully. Raphael rubbed the back of his neck once before looking at me, and for the first time since meeting him, he genuinely looked unsure. I almost transferred out of the department last month. I blinked. That's it? He frowned slightly. That's not the important part. Then what's the important part? Raphael exhaled slowly. The reason. Something in his tone made my chest tighten again. He looked down briefly before continuing. My ex works at the company too. Oh. Oh, that explained a lot. He's not in our department, Raphael added quickly. Different floor. The tiny, irrational, jealous part of me still latched onto the word he, though. Not because I didn't already suspect Raphael liked men, because hearing him confirm it out loud made everything suddenly real. And apparently, Raphael noticed my expression changing because his voice softened immediately. What? I shook my head once. Nothing. Just, I think that's the first time you've actually confirmed you date men. Raphael stared at me for half a second, then laughed softly. Kenneth, what? You thought I wanted to kiss you platonically? I groaned and covered my face. Shut up. His laugh got warmer. No, seriously. What did you think was happening? I don't know. I panic easily. That's true. I peeked at him through my fingers. You're enjoying this way too much. A little. God, even nervous, he still looked unfairly attractive. I dropped my hands and leaned back against the couch again. So your ex works there? Yeah. And you almost transferred because of him? Raphael nodded slowly. We were together almost 3 years. That hit harder than I expected. 3 years was serious. His expression shifted quieter after that. It ended right before I moved departments. What happened? He hesitated, then shrugged once. He cheated. The bluntness of the answer caught me off guard. Oh. Yeah. For the first time all night, Raphael looked genuinely hurt underneath the calm exterior he usually carried. And suddenly a lot of things about him made sense. Why he was careful, why he noticed things so closely, why he seemed guarded even while flirting with me. I looked at him quietly. That's why you were careful with me. Raphael met my eyes. Mm-hmm. Because we worked together. And because I knew I'd actually care. The honesty in his voice hit hard again. Always with him. No games, no pretending, just real. I moved a little closer without thinking about it. Raphael noticed immediately. His expression softened. I didn't tell you because I wanted to scare you off. You didn't. You sure? I looked at him for a second before answering honestly. I'm still a little scared. That made him smile faintly. Fair. But not because of you. His eyes held mine carefully. Then what? I hesitated, then sighed quietly. This feels important already. The words sounded more vulnerable out loud than they had in my head. But Raphael didn't look uncomfortable hearing them. If anything, he looked relieved. Yeah, he admitted softly. It does. Silence settled between us again. Heavy this time, but good heavy. The kind where both people realized the same thing at once. This wasn't casual anymore. Maybe it never had been. Raphael reached for my hand slowly, like he was still checking whether it was okay. I let him. His fingers slid between mine naturally, comfortably, and somehow that tiny gesture felt more intimate than making out on my kitchen counter earlier. You know what's weird? I murmured. What? I usually hate vulnerability. Raphael smiled slightly. You hide it terribly. Rude. You literally look at me like I hung the moon every time I bring you coffee. I stared at him in horror. I absolutely do not. He laughed quietly. You absolutely do. I tried to argue, but honestly, he was probably right, which was humiliating. Raphael squeezed my hand lightly. You're cute when you're embarrassed. That's enough talking for you, actually. His smile widened. God, I was done for. Completely. The room fell quieter after that. Not awkward, just comfortable. The kind of silence that only happens when you stop performing around someone. Raphael leaned back into the couch cushions, still holding my hand loosely while looking at me. And suddenly I realized something. You really were watching me before we started talking. He looked amused immediately. What gave it away? You know weirdly specific things about me. Mm-hmm. That's concerning. I know your coffee order too. I stared at him. That's somehow worse. It gets worse. Oh no. You hum when you're concentrating. My face went hot instantly. I do not. You do. That's fake. You also bite the inside of your cheek when you're stressed. I blinked at him slowly. How long have you been observing me like a nature documentary? Raphael laughed hard enough this time that he leaned forward slightly. And honestly, seeing him fully relaxed like this did dangerous things to my heart. Because most people in the office only saw the composed version of him. Quiet, professional, controlled. But here, on my couch, Raphael looked warm, open, happy. And the realization that I got to see this version of him made my chest ache a little. His laughter faded slowly while he looked at me again, then softer. You notice things about me too. I swallowed. Yeah. Like what? The question immediately made me nervous, because there were too many answers. The way he looked at me during meetings, the way his voice changed when he said my name, the fact he always noticed when I was overwhelmed before anyone else did. Instead, I shrugged weakly. You always pretend to be calmer than you actually are. Raphael's eyebrows lifted slightly. That's specific. I pay attention too. For a second, he just stared at me. Then something in his expression softened so much it almost hurt to look at. He moved closer slowly after that. No hesitation this time. His hand slid gently against my jaw again, while his thumb brushed my cheek. And when he kissed me this time, it felt different. Not tense, not uncertain, just real. Like both of us had finally stopped pretending this was temporary. I kissed him back immediately, my hand sliding into his hair while Raphael pulled me closer against him. And somewhere between his quiet laugh against my mouth and the way his arms wrapped around me, I realized I was already falling for him. Hard. Falling for Raphael should have terrified me more than it did. Maybe because deep down I think I already knew it was happening. Long before that night. Long before the diner. Before the elevator. Before he kissed me in my kitchen like he'd been thinking about it for weeks. It was there in all the little things. The coffee appearing on my desk. The way he noticed when I skipped lunch. The way he always looked for me first in meetings without realizing he was doing it. And now here he was, sitting on my couch with one arm around me while the city lights glowed softly through my apartment windows. Like this was the most natural thing in the world. Raphael rested his forehead lightly against mine after kissing me again. You're thinking too much, he murmured. How do you always know? You get quiet. I smiled faintly. That's not exactly rare for me. No, he admitted softly. But this quiet is different. God, he really did notice everything. I leaned back slightly, just enough to look at him properly. And honestly, that might have been the moment that got me the most. Not the kissing, not the flirting, just seeing Raphael relaxed, happy, looking at me like I was someone worth wanting. It made my chest ache in this weird, overwhelming way. You're staring, he said quietly. I know. His mouth twitched slightly. What's going on in your head? I hesitated, then decided to be honest for once. I think I'm a little screwed. Raphael laughed softly. Because of me? Very much because of you. That smile again. Warm, private, dangerously addictive. He brushed his thumb lightly against my cheek. Good, he said softly. I stared at him. That shouldn't have been attractive. But it was. Unfortunately, he was right. We stayed like that for a while after, talking, laughing, occasionally getting distracted, kissing each other again. And somewhere around 2 a.m., Raphael ended up stretched beside me on the couch while I rested against him, half exhausted. His fingers absent-mindedly traced patterns against my arm while some random movie played unnoticed on the TV. It felt stupidly domestic, like we'd been doing this for years instead of hours. You know what's weird? I murmured sleepily. What? I usually hate people in my space. Raphael smiled without looking away from the TV. And yet, here I am. And yet, here you are. He looked down at me then, softer than before. You want me to go? The fact he asked that, instead of assuming, nearly melted me. I shook my head immediately. No. Something warm flickered across his face after that. Not lust, not tension, something deeper. And honestly, that scared me in the best possible way.
Eventually, I forced myself upright with a groan. If I don't sleep soon, I'm gonna die. Fair. I looked toward the hallway leading to my bedroom, then back at Raphael, and suddenly became very aware of the situation again, because there was exactly one bed in my apartment. Raphael noticed immediately. His expression turned carefully neutral. I can take the couch. The fact he offered made me smile instantly. You hate my couch. You noticed? It's literally the world's most uncomfortable couch. That's true. I hesitated for half a second longer, then quietly, you can stay with me. Raphael held my gaze for a second. You sure? Yeah. His expression softened immediately, and for some reason that moment felt more intimate than any of the kissing had. The bedroom suddenly felt smaller once we were actually in it. Not awkward, just aware. I changed into sweatpants in the bathroom while Raphael borrowed one of my t-shirts. And when I came back into the room and saw him sitting on the edge of my bed wearing my clothes, yeah, that did something dangerous to me emotionally. Raphael looked up and caught me staring immediately. What? You look good in my shirt. The corner of his mouth lifted. You're biased. Very. He laughed quietly before climbing into bed beside me. The lights clicked off a second later, leaving the room lit only by soft city glow through the curtains. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then Raphael shifted slightly closer, tentative, like he was still checking whether this was okay. I moved closer first. That seemed to answer his question. His arm slid around my waist carefully, pulling me against him. And honestly, I don't think I've ever relaxed that fast around another person before. No tension, no performance, just warmth, comfort. Raphael pressed a soft kiss against the back of my shoulder. You okay? He murmured. Yeah. You sure? I smiled into the darkness. You ask that a lot. Just making sure. The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten again. I turned slightly toward him then, enough to barely make out his face in the dark. You know what's funny? What? I thought you hated me when you started working there. Raphael laughed softly against my shoulder. Kenneth. What? I was literally losing my mind over you. I laughed quietly. That's dramatic. You make me dramatic. The honesty of it made me smile into the pillow. Silence settled again after that. Comfortable silence. The kind that feels safe. And lying there wrapped up with Raphael in the middle of the night, I realized something that honestly should have been obvious already. This wasn't some random office fling. Wasn't temporary. Wasn't casual. Not for me. Probably not for him either. I think Raphael realized it too because after a while, he spoke again quietly into the darkness. I'm really glad you stayed late that night. The exact words hit me right in the chest because everything had started there. Two exhausted coworkers alone in a nearly empty office. One coffee, one diner, one almost moment after another, until eventually neither of us could pretend anymore. I turned slightly in his arms until I could kiss him softly in the dark, and Raphael kissed me back immediately, like he never wanted me far away again. Maybe this thing between us would get messy eventually. Maybe work would become complicated. Maybe feelings already were. But lying there with Raphael holding me close while the city slept outside my apartment, none of that felt scary anymore. Not when he looked at me the way he did.
Not when he said my name like it mattered. And definitely not when he whispered softly against my mouth right before we finally fell asleep. Good night, Kenneth. Title: I stayed late at the office with the quiet new guy. Then we got stuck in the elevator. Gay love story preview. Text: He pushed me against the kitchen counter. Video description: Kenneth thought staying late at the office would just mean another exhausting night of spreadsheets and bad coffee, until he ended up alone with Raphael, the quiet new guy nobody could figure out. What starts as late night work turns into midnight diner trips, stolen glances across meetings, and tension neither of them can ignore anymore. But when an elevator gets stuck and Raphael finally admits what he's been feeling, Kenneth realizes this might be far more dangerous than a simple office crush. Slow burn chemistry, late night tension, accidental flirting, and one coworker who notices everything. This story builds from awkward office moments into something intense, emotional, and impossible to stop thinking about.